So having spent a few weeks in Oculus Medium, I keep getting lots of questions about getting models out and what the resolution's like, and lots of questions about what to do with it when you've got it out of Medium. So I just wanted to do a quick, very basic video about the path of how I'm doing it. And I want to keep it as basic as just transferring spheres through 3 packages. So this one is obviously Oculus Medium. So this is where we do the sculpt. So if we just set some basic colors so we know what we're going to pass through the 3 different pieces of software. So I'm just putting a yellow on. We'll use clay. We'll set it to single, which means it'll just fire once with a sphere, and we'll just fire that off once. Oops, bright red isn't yellow, is it? So let's just get a nice yellow. And all on one layer. So if we look at the layering system, we're on one layer, and the resolution is just left at default. So that at the moment is just the base layer. So the yellow one is the lowest level of sculpting. So if I carried on sculpting now, it would keep it at that lowest resolution. So let's go to a new layer. So we should be on layer 2 now. Keeping symmetry on because it just gives us a couple of different spheres for when I cross them over later on. And we'll do, so we've done a new layer, and we'll go resolution, hit it once, and that gives us 1 resolution higher. So similar sort of size, and we'll change the color because we're going to go into UV maps later on. Let's change the color. And that's red, 2 spheres. Now what I will do is I'll do a smaller one here, just to give you an idea of what happens. So that's 1 resolution up, and the spheres are across the symmetrical axis. And what that means is it would have welded it across this seam here, which is something we can have a look at. So let's go into a new layer. So that's 1 layer, 2 layers. Let's go to new layer. So we're on layer 3, and we'll change the color again. So we'll go to a green. We've got the sphere here. So before we do it, we'll go resolution 1, resolution 2. So we're now 2 resolutions up. And what we'll do again, we'll just weld one just to see what that looks like. Okay. So it's quite clear where we're at so far. So that's level 1, 1 level up, 2 levels up. So let's go to a new layer again. So this is the 4th layer, and we'll go to a blue. There we go. And on this layer, what we'll do is we'll do 1, 2, 3, 4. So this is quite high now. See how what it's actually done is it's made each resolution has made the sphere seem smaller on the trigger. So I'm going to do a couple of things. So I'm going to do 1 across like so, which will be the weld like that. And then I'm also going to do 1 here that's not welded at that higher resolution, and then make 1 more layer. You see we're back to that lower level. I'm going to do another color, but I'm going to intersect on a different layer. So let's choose another random color, and we'll go fully intersect there, so we can really see what happens with the intersections across those layers. So you've got lots of resolutions, you've got 5 layers, and each of these does a different thing. So let's have a look at what happens to all of those when we take them out. So to take them out, first of all, what we'll do is we'll just go home, and then we'll go export, and we'll clear all that, and we'll just call this spheres space 01001. Enter. And we'll now move to the next piece of software, which will be MeshLabs. And in MeshLabs, we'll have a look at the wireframes and see what we've ended up with. Okay, so we're in MeshLab, and we'll open the project. We'll import the mesh actually, and then we'll have a look where Oculus has saved it. So under SouthernGFX, I've got spheres 001, and in there I've got 2 OBJs. Now what Oculus does is it gives you a preview object and the actual object. So the preview object is internal for the Oculus Medium. So we want this one, spheres 001 OBJ. And let's see what comes in there. So it's importing it down here at the bottom. And straight away you can see everything's come in exactly as you would expect it. So what we've got is the different levels of spheres, starting with the yellow, moving on to the red, the 2 reds welded together, green, and then onto the blues and onto the pinks. So what we'll do first of all is we'll have a look with wireframe on just to examine what's happened, and then move through each one by one. So that's level 1, and that's what you're getting in Medium when you're sculpting. So what it does is on the fly it triangulates. So this is exactly the same as Sculptress from what I can tell. And it's basically adding geometry behind where you're sculpting with triangles, and literally everything is a triangle there. So it's very, very much more like Sculptress than it is like ZBrush, which I think most people would know anyway. Then if we go up a resolution, you go to the red one, and that's level 2, and that's where we have double, or you would say almost double the amount. So it looks like it's not subdivided it in the way that you'd expect with subdivision algorithms, but it's actually got obviously almost like 4 times the amount. And we'll look at that when we start breaking it down and having a look at the poly counts. So just as an idea, this entire model, this entire scene, if you look down here at the bottom, is 208 vertices and 416 faces. And you can see straight away when you're seeing a lot of people sculpting in Medium, they start like this, and then they up the resolution, and then up the resolution, and then suddenly you're into this territory here, this blue one. You can see this is a 4 times, and that's on one sphere. So if you go into Medium and you do 4 times the resolution straight away, that's what you're sculpting on. So you can understand now why some systems without the large amounts of RAM and the higher end 1070s and 1080s, why they're struggling to handle the bigger models that people are doing. And certainly some of the models that I've done just get ridiculously high. Because again, this is just simply a set of spheres. It's not in any way even a model. A good thing to look at is what the welding's doing. So across symmetry, when you do the spray, that's clipping, so you're seeing inside there. That's welding across that symmetrical seam. So the 2 red spheres that we welded together, that we sprayed, became a welded single unit. The same at the higher res. And then down here, same with the blue res, with the blue one with the higher res. But over here, the pink was on a different layer, and the blue was on a different layer. So what you've got there is a great example of intersection. So if you have it on different layers and you export it as an OBJ, the initial state that it comes out gives you the ability to keep it as separate items. And a great way to explore that really further would be to see what happens if you take that into ZBrush, which we're going to do in a few minutes. But we'll just bear that in mind, that if you don't want to transfer color into ZBrush and you just want to use the model, and you're doing, for example, eyes inside a head or teeth, if they're on separate layers and you export them as an OBJ, you get them as OBJs that intersect like this. They're still watertight, so I think there wouldn't even be any major cleanup at all in ZBrush, and they'll be absolutely fine as teeth, head, eyes, exactly as they are. Now what will happen here is we could do some cleanup in here that can destroy that. So one of the first things that I do with the models in here is I go to cleaning and repair, and I do merge and close vertices. Now that's all well and good. It cleans up a lot of the messy vertices when you're on a much higher res model than this. But the problem with this is whenever it sees something like that, which is vertices that are overlapping like this here, it will weld them, and it'll make an attempt to weld this to this, and that destroys that ability to have separate models. So be very careful with anything that does merge vertices. Most programs do a merge verts, algorithm. So just be mindful that you're going to lose some of the functionality if you choose to use that later down the line. So this is all vertex painting. So each point in each of these models, each vertex carries the data of the color. So as you can see at the moment, in each individual object carries its own color. So each point in this red model carries the color red. So what use is that to us? Well, that's effectively what ZBrush does with poly painting. But you can't take this directly into ZBrush. If you try and import this into ZBrush, it doesn't retain the vertex color data. You can get it back out of ZBrush. So if you poly paint in ZBrush and export it out, you can get that. And certainly in a program like MeshLab, you can make a colored sphere in ZBrush, which we'll probably do at the end of this just to test it. And you can get that back out as vertex data, and then you can send it to something like MeshLabs. But that's not really what this video is about. So what can we do with this one now? So first of all, we can make some UV maps for it. Now, if you do UV maps and then transfer this vertex data onto those UV maps, you can then transition it into ZBrush, which means you can then do all the nice good stuff that we want to do later on. So let's just see how that's possible. So first of all, we'll go into, let's have a look at texture, and then down to parameterization, and we'll use a trivial per triangle, this one here. I've tried one or two others, not had much success with much of this. I've destroyed a lot of models, and this is obviously the one that seems to work the best. So we'll just see what happens when we do that. And we'll do it with a texture dimension of, we'll do a 4K one, 4096 to give us lots of room. We'll do the intertriangle border 2, see what that does, and we'll hit apply. Watch down here and see what happens. So we'll hit apply, and what it's saying there is applied the filter, I can't even say it, parameterization, trivial per triangle in 112 milliseconds. So it's fairly fast, and it's done that. So that's actually given us a tiled UV map, which is the same as AUVs, I think, in ZBrush, or it seems to be the same. So what does that mean? So it's now carrying UV data. What can we do with that? You can't see it at the moment in this. What can we do with that? So we go to filters, and we'll go texture, and we'll go transfer the texture to vertex color. No, we won't, because what that would do is it would take any of the UV texture color and put it back on the vertices. We don't want that one. We want transfer the vertex attributes. Let me move the mouse and you'll see better what I'm doing. Texture, transfer the vertex attributes to texture, one or two meshes. So basically what it's saying is take the data from the vertices and transfer that to the UV map for me. So I'm going to do that now, and I'm going to give that, again, I'll give it a 4096 by 4096. Keep all of the other settings the same, and we'll use exactly the same model, so we're not going to change any of this. I can use a signed texture, but I don't think it matters. And we'll hit apply, and let's see what happens there. So if you see down here at the bottom, so what that's doing now is it's taking that UV data, it's applying all of the vertex color to the UV map, and it's mapping it out for us. So while that's cooking, what we can do is, let's just open up pop it up here. If you look in here, which is the folder that we started with, what we've got is, forget the assets, that's an Oculus Medium thing. So we've got the spheres that we know of. We've got a preview object here that we know of already. What it's done is it's applied a spheres 001 underscore text.png. So it's made us a texture map ready. It's made us a 4K texture map. And now what it's doing is it's writing the color data to that texture map. So it's taking a lot longer, obviously, than the initial UV work that we did, which you'd expect. But what it's going to do is it's going to instantly make us the texture in here. Now, one thing I can do just in case is it's going to overwrite this model here. So I'm going to just make a copy of that. and paste it in here. And the reason I've done that is so now we've got a copy of sphere 0001. And the reason I've done that is in a moment when I save this, it's going to overwrite that initial model that we had. So I wanted a copy to keep in there to do a comparison in ZBrush in a moment. Now, you look here, you've got a texture map, and what it's done is it's spat out a 4K 4096 by 4096 PNG that's tiled. Totally useless if you want to take it into Photoshop and paint it flat, because all you're going to see is patches of the UVs. But in ZBrush, that's now going to give us everything we want. So let's just have a look at that. So go back and have a look. Close that now. It's done it in what's that? 69,000 milliseconds, and everything's done. So all we've got to do is save it. So we'll go File, and we will now export the mesh. Keep it exactly the same, name it the same, and that's it, done. And that's everything that we need to do in MeshLabs. So let's move that now into ZBrush and see what's next. Okay, so we're in ZBrush, so we'll just do a couple of things first. So we will take our sphere 001. That's the copy, so we don't want that, and we don't want the preview, so it's this one. And we'll just import that and see what it brings us in. So it's brought the model in, no problem there. We'll go on to the next one and import the copy, which is our original model, if you remember. So we've got one of each there now, which is going to really help us. So let's just investigate that copy first of all and see what that gave us. So if this is the copy, we'll just put a white material on it. There's no color data, as you can see. If you look in Subtool and switch on poly painting, there's no poly paint data. There's no textures coming at all, so it doesn't bring you anything in at all. What you get is an OBJ. So Shift and F, and we'll look at the wireframe. And here we are now, we're in ZBrush. We have got polygroups, which is interesting. So that's quite useful. And so basically, if you make something in medium, this is what's going to happen. If you go up the resolutions, you're going to start at that for every spray that you do. Then that if you go at one resolution, then that, then this one here. Now, the interesting thing to look at here is that if you just make a massive brush and you use move topological, which means it'll respect the islands. If I move this around, you can see, obviously, all of these are welded. These are single polygroup models. So you could do what you'd normally do in ZBrush, and you could mask them and break them down even into different subgroups, if you subtools if you wanted. But the important thing to notice is what's happened over here. So we haven't, this is the model that hasn't been to MeshLabs, and we didn't do a merge verts with. Now we didn't do it on the other one, so I just wanted to show you. But you can see now they're still separate components. Those are welded because they welded across the seam. Those were separate layers, and that's a really important thing to remember when you're working on your models, is to keep it all layered out correctly, and you'll get it all back into ZBrush. But as we know, that's no use to us now because there's no color data and we've lost everything. So yes, we could take that back out, and we could poly paint it up, we could UV it and do all the things that we'd normally do. But that's pretty much not what we want to do. So we'll move on to spheres 001. Now this is our unwrapped one. And that isn't polygroup now. So when you do what we did, you're going to lose that data. Is it UV mapped? Well, yeah, we did. So what does the UV map look like? So a quick way of looking in ZBrush would be, let's go to our UV map and Morph Uv. Now Morph Uv is one of my favorite tools because it just shows you what your unwrap is live. And if you let's do Shift and F there. Let's have a look at what we're looking at there. This is your UV tile, and that's showing you every single UV tile that it made when it did the unwrap. And that's obviously horrible as a UV method, but what's really interesting is it's got a set of UVs, so straight away it becomes useful for us. So let's morph it back into our spheres. We'll just keep this on for a moment. So let's go over here, and then before we do anything, let's bring the texture map in. So if we go texture, import, and we'll bring in that tiled 001 texture that it made. It's a PNG, so it's in. Bring it in here, And always when you bring textures in ZBrush, you have to flip it on V. That's just a thing that ZBrush does, so you have to remember that. So first of all, let's just see if that UV tiles work. So at the moment, we've got it on here. Shift and F to get rid of the wireframe. And let's have a look at the texture. So texture map, straight up, pop it on, and there we go. So now we're in useful territory, because what we've done is we've taken the color from Medium, we've applied it in MeshLabs from a vertex weight map or vertex map to a UV map and transferred it into ZBrush. So now we're cooking. So let's have another quick look. So let's have a look at our Morph Uv again, because that's always useful. I thought I had it out on this menu, but it doesn't look like I've got it. This is our training interface. So there's our Morph Uv, and again, it's applied all of those sets as we want them. So that now is working perfectly well. So quite happy with that. So what can we do next? So let's make some usable UVs really. Let's just see what we can do with that. So let's pop it on its side. And then first of all, under the sub tool, what we can do is let's UV map it first actually. In fact, no, what we'll do is we'll transfer the data onto the model and then we'll UV map it. So let's just make sure we can transfer it fine. So we've got color data on the texture map, but no, you see the little icon there? We've got no polypaint data. So if I switch that on, that's one way of doing it. You don't need to do that. You can just go here and go polypaint, and can you please polypaint from a texture? And that should have done it now. Let's just see what that did. So it's texture's off now. You can confirm that if you want by changing to another texture just to be sure and make sure it's off. Not that you need to do that. So that is now just poly painting. So that is just vertex painting inside of ZBrush. That's the standard poly painting that we use, and it hasn't done any damage to anything that we that we've done. So that's absolutely fine. But what we can do now is we can UV it. So there's a couple of ways of doing this that would be useful. So let's just let me just think how to do it. Let's split all of these spheres into different poly groups first of all. I'll turn the poly painting off for a moment. And we'll just do a basic UV map just to give us something to work with. So we'll go Control, and then we'll use Mask Lasso, and we'll just split these in half and do a Control and W for into a auto poly group, and then do the same thing that way. I'm not doing this in any way accurately because what I'm trying to do is just do a back and a front to UV map. Control and W that way. That's them all split, and we'll just try it with these horrible ones at the back. And Control and W. There we go. And the reason I've done that is because I want to UV map it. Oops, Control and Z. Move that one back. I want to UV map it using polygroups. So I've just split it back and front to give me a back and a front shell when it opens up. So what I can do is, just to be really sure, I'm just going to duplicate the top and the bottom one, and I'm going to hide the top one and keep the bottom one here. So let's have a look at UV mapping it. So a very, very quick way of doing it would be Z plugin, UV master. You could do a lot more than this. This is just a very fast way of doing it. Polygroups, take the symmetry off and hit unwrap. Now that's going to take a couple of minutes, a couple of seconds just to get that unwrap done. But it's the quickest, cleanest way of just throwing on a set of UVs. And what that's doing is it's looking at the polygroups back and front of each of the components of the subtool. And what it's doing is it's unwrapping each piece. What we'll basically get is a full tile of circles, hopefully, which will give us the ability to then, should we want to paint on them, that would be more like a character rather than the nasty UVs that we came in with. So it's nearly done unwrapping. You can see the process here now working. Give it another few seconds. Done. And let's just double check that that's worked. So remember how we do that. So what we do is You don't have to keep doing this bit, but it's good for me to show you just while we're doing it. So we'll go back to UV map and Morph UV, and there we go. On that model, on that layer, it's UV mapped into circle tiles. And if that was a head now, and you'd split that polygroup up correctly, that would give you the ears, it would give you the nose, it would give you anything that you've done, and it would give you a fairly decent quick stab unwrap. You can see the other model there because we've got two sub tools now. So we'll bring that back. So they're both in the same space in the world. Okay, so what do we do now? So we've now got a UV map on this lower one here, and we've got a UV map, but the wrong one, and polypaint data on this one. So what we can do is we can just project on really, which is let's just do Shift and F and just have a quick check we are on the right one. So let's go onto this model. We'll switch polypaint on. So that's on with the eye and on with polypainting. On this one here, let's make sure, double check it's on. On the lower one now, what we're going to do is go to down here, and we'll go to texture map. Before we go to that, we'll say, can you UV map 4096? And that means just give me a UV space of 4096. So that's basically make me a 4K map. And texture map, so we don't want this one, we want a new texture, and it's going to generate as a 4K map because we set it above there. And the last little bit, we're going to say, can you please make me a new UV map, sorry, can you please paint me a new one from polypainting? So new from polypaint, and it should pull it in, presuming you've got RGB switched on here. That's the important bit. So let's go back and look at that. Let's hide our top one, and what have we got left? So we've got our model. It's got color data on it, but as you can see, polypainting is off. So what's that left with me with? So it's left me with a model that can then be, if we use our trusty UV map and we do Morph UV, we've got a fully textured model carrying the color from medium, and a texture map. If you want to grab that, there's your texture map, and that now you can just clone it, and it's now in here, and you can flip it on V and export it, and then everything works. So of that model, you've basically now got everything you need to go to the next process, which can be whatever you want. So if you, as much as I've done it at a very low basic level, that's one way to carry all of that data that you've taken from Oculus Medium through MeshLab, which could be lots of other packages that can do that. We've used Materialize Magics for some of this. Lots of other programs that can do that kind of stuff for you. But that's a really good way of getting your data out of Oculus through a transition piece of software and then into ZBrush in a way that can then be color printed. So there's no reason why you can't then take that to, for example, to process for color printing on the new J750, the new color printer that people are starting to use. And I've had the pleasure of using and working with that machine last year on a project, so I know how amazing stuff's going to be that people are coming out with, and you can see some of it in the Oculus and the Medium forums already, and people are starting to do full color prints straight out of, well, not straight out of Medium, but through a process like this. And this is just one way to do it. So hopefully that explains some of the processes that I'm using, and hopefully that'll be useful for some people.